What's up, friends, and welcome to Block and Build, a podcast from Convergence Magazine. I'm your host and the publisher of Convergence, Caden Mock. On this show, we are building a roadmap for the movement that's working to block the impacts of rising authoritarianism while building the strength and resilience of the broad front that we need to win. This week on the show, we're taking a look at a critical state Supreme Court justice election in Wisconsin that is happening this Tuesday, April 1st. I'm joined shortly by the state director of the Wisconsin Working Families Party, Corinne Rosen, and the director of Vera Action, Insha Rahman, to discuss why this off-season state special election has become such a critical referendum on the influence of Elon Musk and his money on electoral politics, as well as how folks are organizing on the ground to push back. But first, these headlines. The administration's attacks on dissent on campus continue to escalate. Marco Rubio has threatened that they're going to do this to, quote, hundreds of people. By this point, you probably have seen the clip of Tufts University PhD student Rumeysa Ozturk being kidnapped on the street in broad daylight by plainclothes police officers while on her way to break her fast for her Ramadan iftar. This happened in Somerville, Massachusetts, which is ironically a town that literally for decades has been a sanctuary city for migrants. She was also moved to a detention center in, you guessed it, Louisiana. And what did Ozturk do to be targeted in this way? She co-authored an op-ed in the Tufts student newspaper criticizing the university administration's response, or lack thereof, to a student government resolution asking the university to divest from Israel. There's a couple of things in this viral clip that I want to highlight for our listeners, especially because I've noticed that very few things bring me more despair than watching ICE kidnappings. The first is that the reason that this went viral is because it did get captured on surveillance footage. Having this clear footage of law enforcement action helps us better advocate for those who are being targeted. So filming these goons is really important. And the second is there's that bystander who walks by, who just carrying a bag of takeout acts like nothing is happening. They don't turn around or even acknowledge what looks like, at first glance, a woman getting basically assaulted on the street by a group of burly guys. And I get why this is a potentially very scary situation for a bystander, but imagine how much scarier it is for Ozturk. I don't know that there necessarily would have been like a different outcome from this event if the bystander had at least stopped, acknowledged, or even better, started filming from their own phone. But I think that it highlights that we all can and should be ready to potentially break out of the bystander bubble and look out for our neighbors. The best thing to do is probably to find a cop watch or an ICE watch training in your area, because the more prepared that we are, the more useful our response can be in heated moments like these. Also, last week, the week of March 17th, Congress was on recess, but apparently on orders from Daddy Trump to hide from their angry constituents, many Republican representatives were nowhere to be found in their home districts. Thousands of constituents did turn out, though, to make their anger heard, thanks in part to local progressive organizing networks like Indivisible and our friends at the Working Families Party, who co-organized empty chair town halls in Republican-controlled purple districts across the country during the recess. When you're planning trillions of dollars in cuts to Medicaid, threatening seniors' access to Social Security, firing hundreds of thousands of federal workers, and working to eliminate the Department of Education that nearly every working and middle-class family depends on for their children, of course you wouldn't deign to face this when you believe that you are as untouchable as you are spineless.
Hundreds of Hoosiers gathered today at the downtown library for an empty chair town hall meeting organized by the group Indivisible Northeast Indiana.
So-called empty chair town halls with an empty chair.
Empty chair town hall meeting in Jacksonville, the empty chair town hall.
And it was called an empty chair town hall because attendees say Representative Issa refuses to engage with his constituents.
You take care of us.
What are you going to do about it in the short run for the people of Indiana?
Why are you silent on Trump's current intimidation of the judiciary?
How can you assure me and other retirees that we will continue to receive our Social Security and our health benefits?
Why do you expect us to pay taxes when you have stripped us of a representative government that stands for us in its constitutional powers?
What is the world that you want to create for young people?
I'm very concerned that we are having an assault on our democracy.
And now to Wisconsin. On this coming Tuesday, April 1st, Wisconsin is holding a special election to fill a state Supreme Court seat that is being vacated by retiring Justice Ann Walsh Bradley. In the past 2 months, it has rapidly become one of the most expensive state races in history, with candidates and outside groups having spent over $80 million at this point on candidates Susan Crawford and Brad Schimel. While the race is officially nonpartisan on paper, the investments and stakes have been anything but. Joining me today to learn more about this race's stakes, its candidates, its big spenders, and how movement organizing is involved, State Director of Wisconsin Working Families Party, Corinne Rosen. Corinne, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Kaden.
And also the Director of Vera Action, Insha Rahman, is joining me as well. Insha, thank you for making the time.
Thanks for having us.
Let's also, because we have a national audience for the pod, let's get a little into the background of this race. How do state Supreme Court races in Wisconsin work, and what are the issues that the state Supreme Court justices deal with on a regular basis? Let's start with you, Corinne.
Yeah, so just the background of the race, and I'll actually go back to 2023. We actually had a Supreme Court race in 2023 where we took back, and now we have a liberal court here in Wisconsin. And so we've got a retiring justice this year. And so that seat is up. And there's a lot of things like at stake on the ballot. If we win and Susan Crawford gets elected, we are going to see things move in the right directions in terms of redistricting, in terms of workers' rights, in terms of access to abortion care. If we don't, those things are all on the ballot, and they're probably going to move in the court's going to move in the other direction, and so will those decisions. And so there's a lot of real long-term decisions that affect real people in Wisconsin, and the Wisconsin Supreme Court is going to be deciding those.
Yeah, I remember that race, that what seemed to be sort of the crux of it was about these extremely gerrymandered maps that gave single party control over the state legislature in Wisconsin. And that's a big, I don't know, it seems like one of those things that's has huge ripple effects for everybody in the state.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And also, when we won that seat back, the gerrymandered maps, which some people have called the worst in the country up until that point, which kept basically Wisconsin red, even though we're really a purple state, for the last 10 years. And so we won back both got rid of gerrymandered districts. We also won back the right to use drop boxes, which people use for absentee ballot voting. And so that was a really big deal. So,
yeah. And Insha, why did Vera Action get involved in this particular race?
So we've been working in Wisconsin since 2022. And let me just say what Vera Action is. We're the advocacy and political partner of the Vera Institute of Justice. Vera is a national nonprofit. It's been around for 60 plus years, and our work is to end mass incarceration, fight for immigrants' rights, and help build safe, thriving communities. We got involved because we know you can pass really good policy on criminal justice reform, but if the politics of crime make it so that those policies don't stand or they're really hard to keep in place, we don't win, we don't make progress, we don't move forward. And so, as I said, we actually started working in Wisconsin back in 2022 because as Vera Action, as the C4, we got involved in races, congressional races, local races, where crime was the dominant wedge issue being wielded in that election. And back in 2022 in Wisconsin, it was the U.S. Senate race between Ron Johnson, Mandela Barnes. We could talk a little bit more in a minute about the very particular dynamics around crime as a wedge issue in that race. But then it didn't go away in 2022. 2023, Corinne mentioned the Supreme Court race then. Judge Janet Protasiewicz, who won, was being attacked for being, quote unquote, soft on crime. And that's the same dynamic that we are seeing here right now between Brad Schimel, who is a Republican, former prosecutor, Susan Crawford, a Democrat, also a former prosecutor, even though a sitting Supreme Court justice actually works on lots of things. Crime and public safety is a very small sort of portion of their overall portfolio. Crime is a dominant issue on the election, trail and on the campaign trail. That's why we got involved, to help candidates counter tough on crime rhetoric and inoculate against those attacks and actually turn the debate to what voters want, which is we all want safety, we all want accountability, we all want justice.
Sure. Yeah, I find the tough on like emergence of the tough on crime thing right now to be very interesting. I live in Oakland, and so much of our local politics right now are being shaped by that too. And I think that like a lot of communities across the country are having this experience. And I don't think it is an accident, right? Like, I think it is. There's some very clear sort of narrative through lines here, and I'm excited to get into that with you all. But I think one of the things that also makes this race interesting is the amount of money that is being poured into it, right? And I think that like one of the people who's pouring a ton of money into this is Elon Musk. Corinne, I'm curious to hear from you about how the attention from Musk and the sort of like national political environment is shaping this race, and how it, does it feel like this is a referendum on Doge and Musk and Trump's project?
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely does feel like it's a referendum on those things. And with Elon Musk coming in, I think at this point, the U.S. Or the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, they think that will spend over $100 million. It's now the most expensive race in U.S. history for that seat. Elon Musk himself has put in over $22.5 million into the race. And so, yeah, I mean, they're coming in, they're spending money, they're trying to buy the Supreme Court race. Also, Elon Musk has a court case that will come before the Supreme Court. And so literally trying to buy a decision with Brad Schimel. And we've tried to make that clear to the public that this is he's bought and sold and paid for, and that he's not the person that's going to represent them. And so, but yes, it definitely, having that much money in the race, it's concerning, up against all these smaller grassroots groups that are kind of just fighting to basically talk to people at the doors and make sure that our message gets through. But we have really at WFP focused on being serious about safety, the serious on safety messaging. It seems to be cutting through. We're having direct conversations with voters, both on the phone and at their doors. And so we've partnered with Vera Action, who has been a great partner, and they think about this messaging all day long. And so we've found the things that we do great in terms of doing the direct voter contact, and then partnering with groups that are bringing up kind of the newest messaging and putting together an action plan around that. And so that's what we've done. We're hoping that cuts through and it's working. But yes, it definitely, Elon Musk throwing all that money into the race it's absurd. He's also given $1 million out to one person in Green Bay, which is going to be a very important area for this election. And he plans to give out $2 million more, 2 checks, I believe, in the form of $1 million to 2 different people before Sunday. So he's literally trying to buy this race. And he's also offering people to $100 a piece to sign a petition saying that they won't vote for activist judges, but essentially he's offering them $100 to vote, and then also offering people $100 to refer somebody to do that. So they're using their money to stay in the media.
Yeah, no, I feel like that kind of tactic is going to get headlines on a local news station. Like it's whether the money comes through or not, like just announcing it is the kind of thing that I feel like, you might see on like your local TV news station.
Yeah, I mean, I literally, right before we started this, I had a neighbor that sent me a text with this headline that Elon Musk is giving me $2 million more. And I mean, do you know how many times I've ever talked to her about politics, like through text or something? Never in my life. And she knows what I do, talk about things in person, but we've never talked about it. And she's sending me texts to let me know that that's going on. So
that's pretty wild. Well, thinking about this level of spending that is happening, I imagine like Wisconsin voters are being inundated with things like mailers and TV ads and all this other, the sort of like traditional media as well. But what are the kinds of things that people's organizations and people's movements can be doing to fight back against this kind of inundation that's clearly happening, like viral inundation, really?
Well, I can actually talk a little bit about how this message is coming together, both the sort of soft on crime attacks and then watching the Working Families Party and a number of other organizers and advocates in Wisconsin fight back really effectively. Caden, you said something about living in Oakland and how you're seeing this crime narrative sort of grow everywhere, and it feels like it's on purpose. It is on purpose. So we at Vera Action have been following the money on this, specifically around crime as a line of attack. And what we've seen is in 2020, when defund and the protests and the uprisings, the summer of George Floyd's murder, we saw the GOP spend in that presidential election cycle about $100 million on soft on crime attacks, defund, all of that. We saw that in 2022, a midterm cycle, that number more than doubled to $250 million spent by Republicans attacking Democrats for being quote unquote soft on crime. Just in 2024, the presidential cycle, that quadrupled. Over $1 billion was spent by the GOP across the country attacking Democrats for being soft on crime. So this is not a trend that's going away. There's a lot of money being pumped in to move this message. And what we found from the research that we've done, so we at Vera Action, we don't endorse candidates. We're not doing the incredible work on the ground, but we are here with the research and the messaging strategy and the political strategy. And how do you manage specifically the issue around crime, you know, and sort of what a wedge it becomes in election cycles? Here's what we found is voters are concerned about crime, both valid concerns and then the sort of fear-mongering that we have seen go on overdrive in recent years. And the GOP has historically had an advantage. They have more trust with voters on this issue, but it's only because they're talking about it. It's not because voters agree with their policies. It's such an important distinction. And so what we've been doing for the past couple of years, as Corinne knows well, is saying, hey, Democrats, the left, own this issue. Do not cede ground. Because when that tough on crime message is countered with we are serious about safety, we stand for safety, accountability, and justice. In fact, safety, accountability, and justice wins each and every time. But as I said, in the 2024 cycle, the GOP spent over $1 billion on soft on crime attacks and tough on crime rhetoric. Democrats in response spent about $300 million. And when they responded, they actually reinforced the GOP message by saying, I too am tough on crime. I too am going to crack down on the border. And the problem with Democrats and the left basically sounding like your opposition is it reinforces their brand. It doesn't create a brand for you. So what we've been trying to do is say, don't cede ground on this critical kitchen table issue to people. And there is a winning messaging and political strategy, which is about being serious of safety, accountability, and justice. And so in this race, we are watching Brad Schimel literally be a cartoon character, tough on crime prosecutor. Like, I want to just read 2 sentences from his website, which is literally, you know, from opening the border to releasing criminals on our streets, rogue judges across the nation are putting their radical agenda above the law. Brad Schimel will take back the Wisconsin Supreme Court and end the madness. For Brad Schimel, being tough on crime is not just a campaign slogan. It's a calling. I mean, it's like comical, right?
Yeah, it sounds like a comic book character, straight up.
And then so Susan Crawford, what does she say? Her language is so about safety, accountability, and justice. She says, we know how important it is to protect the basic rights and freedoms of Wisconsinites. She has a deep understanding of our justice system, knows how important it is to have Supreme Court justices who understand how to keep communities safe, who are fair and impartial. There's the accountability bit. And who will reject efforts to politicize the Constitution to undermine our most basic rights. There's justice. Like, it's just right there. And what we have seen in the rare instances where we watch Democrats not just back down, not just sort of be on the opposition's narrative turf, but own their lane of safety, accountability, and justice, and that head-to-head, Democrats will win. So this is a really interesting race. What happens on Tuesday? It's a referendum on, is it about tough on crime or safety and justice? And Corinne and others have done an incredible job of getting that serious about safety message out. And I feel hopeful, actually, and early poll results show I think we're on the right side here.
That is optimistic, and we love to hear it. Yeah, fingers crossed. What does the ground game look like? Taking this messaging to people. What has that been looking like, and what have you been hearing like from voters that you've been talking to, Corinne?
Yeah, so definitely the message has been connecting with voters. We have trained all of our canvassers. We do a very extensive training on, we have both paid canvassers and we have volunteer canvassers. And we do a deep training, even with the people that are like, hey, I've been doing this for 10 years. We're like, great. And we're going to train you for 1 hour on this messaging. So people really understand what we're doing. They understand why we're doing it. And those people are connecting at the doors. And then they're also trained to kind of move on if somebody is not, moving with them on the message. And so we've been using that and making sure that we're having those one-on-one conversations with folks at the doors when we're doing the canvassing. We've also been doing a bunch of events, just showing up at different events that Brad Schimel is at, letting people know, his record, his accountability, right? 6,000 rape kits, that he let sit on a shelf for 2 years. And when we're running our social media ads, people are constantly, piping into the social media on Facebook or Instagram, what have you, saying, Susan Crawford did this, and Brad Schimel is the guy that's tough on crime. And we don't argue with them on whether he's tough on crime or not. We just state the facts of that. Like, he let 6,000, rape kits sit on a shelf for 2 years, untested, and that's not a way to give justice to survivors. And so it's been interesting seeing that kind of has brought up some interesting discussion, and the number of people that are also just pushing out the message. So I'm interested in how many of those people are, they're just on their own pushing that message out, and how many are actually connected with some sort of campaign. But that's definitely the case. And then also when we're doing the phone banking, we're giving the same message on phone banking, the serious on safety messaging. And it works because we're doing it in all the places, and all of our lit too reflects the same messaging.
Yeah. That's great. I think also I'm curious about the way that maybe this is also part of. I want to look at this, like some of the larger forces at work here, both the sort of like why this race matters to people outside of Wisconsin. Because I know why it does, but I would love you to talk a little bit about that as well, both from a like how this might impact our larger politics. It's not just a referendum on Musk, but it's like, as goes Wisconsin, so goes the country in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And especially in this case, we've got 2 congressional districts, right, that could be redistricted. And so we know that if they're redistricted fairly, we have a very good chance of winning those 2 seats. And if they're not, if they gerrymander the districts again, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. But yeah, definitely, as goes Wisconsin, goes the rest of the country in all different areas. We've seen that with Act 10 when they really pushed back on workers' rights, and that was done through the Supreme Court. And we will that decision will come before the courts again this year. And so that once that happened in Wisconsin, it happened in other areas. The same thing is, once we can push back in Wisconsin, we can push back in other areas of the state or other areas of the country. And all eyes are on Wisconsin right now because Elon Musk is nonstop in the news with, Dodge and accountability. And so we need everybody to see that it's not like, if they win this race with the amount of money that they've put into it, it's going to be defeating for other areas in the country. So we're really doing our best with all of our organizations, making sure that we have all the resources that we can, and that we're partnering with both experts in the field, and even, we have some groups that got money in the last few weeks to do, to talk basically about Susan Crawford at the doors, and they didn't have kind of the time to make the lit to do, get their training set up to do that work. They've folded right into our campaign. And that's what, having real partnership looks like, is somebody comes and they say, hey, we want to do this. And we figured out a way with Working Families Party Wisconsin to help them out. So to support those campaigns. So.
And Caden, can I just add one more reason why I think this is so important nationally? So In 2024, Democrats settled on this line of attack against Trump that he's a convicted felon. They said it time and time again. And it was the ad hominem attack, much as like being soft on crime is basically an ad hominem attack. And what we saw is from our research, it did not work. It didn't land for a couple of reasons. One is most voters, unfortunately, in this country, they have a stereotype in their head of who a convicted felon is. And that old white billionaire is not that stereotype. And so it's like Teflon. It just pings off of him. It doesn't land.
Well, it also seems like that would also like bring up a bunch of like this complex of sort of like racist ideas too.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the 20 million Americans, most of whom are Black men, Latino men, who do have a felony conviction, it's really alienating to be like, oh, that's what you think of us. And we found from our research, like literally it showed in the results that calling him a convicted felon didn't work. But when you go after his actions, he doesn't care about the law. He puts himself above others. And that is the really smart strategy that we're watching on this series about safety messaging that Corinne and others are doing in Wisconsin. They're not attacking Brad Schimel. Like, want to know who's really soft on crime? They don't say that. They're like, let's talk about safety, accountability, and justice. But by letting rape kits, rot on a shelf for 2 years, that's not delivering safety to victims. It's not delivering accountability. It's not delivering justice. It's just so much smarter to go after actions, because then voters are like, oh, you're not just another politician talking politician talk. You're actually talking to me about values and principles that matter to me. So I think there is a real opportunity here to see on that line of attack, how do you go after Trump? How do you go after Elon Musk? How do you go after these bad actors, but not with ad hominem attacks that we know just don't land?
Yeah, no, that feels really rich too, because of the like ways that this framing around accountability and safety then also opens the door to being like, what does keep us safe, right? That like there's another door to step through after this one that is complexifying, problematizing the prison industrial complex as like the solution, right? That like I think is very interesting.
Yeah.
You also mentioned earlier the Mandela Barnes Senate race, and I'd love to get into that a little bit more, because I mean, it seems like it happened and then the national media moved on from it really quickly. But I'm curious how y'all's experience in that election cycle has informed the way that you are approaching this moment and this issue.
Yeah, I can start on the crime piece, and then Corinne, I would love for you to talk just sort of more broadly, because that is a race that left many of us just brokenhearted and learning a lot of lessons for the future. So crime became the wedge issue, and the soft on crime, defund attacks became the line of attacks against Mandela Barnes when polls in August, September showed him up by a significant margin against Ron Johnson. And then that's when the money came in, and you saw national money pouring in for Johnson's campaign, and the attacks were relentless. That Mandela Barnes wants to defund the police. He wants to abolish ICE. He's soft on crime, dangerously liberal, and so on and so forth. You just saw it relentlessly. And literally in just a few months, from September to November, the GOP spent $14 million on ads across the state calling Mandela soft on crime. And the problem was that there wasn't enough money mobilizing in those final few months for Barnes's campaign to actually own, no, we're about safety, accountability, and justice. Here's what safety looks like. And so you saw, for one thing, Mandela Barnes lost by 1 percentage point. It was such a close race. But when you pull out the AP VoteCast exit surveys of what voters actually took to the ballot box, about 9% of Wisconsin voters said crime was my top voting issue. And for those voters, Mandela Barnes lost by double digits. The contrast in 2022, humor me for a second, because there's a lesson here, was at the same time there was a U.S. Senate race happening in Pennsylvania, John Fetterman against Mehmet Oz. Crime was the line of attack as well, calling John Fetterman dangerously liberal, soft on crime. He did marshal a lot of money to say, no, I'm about safety, accountability, and justice. We all know he won. But if you actually, again, look at the same exit surveys of the 11% of Pennsylvania voters who said crime is my top voting issue, 51 to 49, they voted for John Fetterman over Mehmet Oz. So that's the power of having a safety and justice message. And that's the power of being able to actually get it out for voters to hear it, because we have seen concretely it shapes how voters vote on an issue that matters so much to them.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I saw in that race is, again, like the media, all the ads came out against Mandela, and there wasn't really the response. And Mandela's a young African-American man running in the state of Wisconsin, and it was clear that the money was coming into the Democratic National Committee, and it wasn't coming into Wisconsin to help defend, to help him win that seat, and he really needed that. The other thing I'll say is that on the doors, and I know the feedback that we were getting was crime. When we talk about crime, we lose. I'm from the city of Milwaukee. Crime is a real issue here. And I was like, how can we pretend like it doesn't exist? Like that's absolutely insane to me. And yet the feedback we were getting from folks at the time was, let's not talk about this. Let's talk about other things. These are the other things we went on. And that messaging, it didn't work. And I love that, we've been connected with Vera Action and been able to really understand that it's not just not talking about something, it's talking about being serious on safety and talking about it in the right way that connects with voters. In 2022, I actually worked with Power to the Polls. I was hired to start that organization. And our only mission was really to help Mandela Barnes get elected. So we were, fighting hard for that. But then again, like the safety issue on the doors was not there. And so I'm proud that like this election cycle, we're able to get out there and talk to folks about the issues that matter to them, and also connect this messaging with the Supreme Court race. And also remind people that, the Supreme Court is not going to be looking at criminal cases, right? That's like a big thing. Like people have no idea. And so when you say they're not going to be looking at criminal cases, because people say, this person is going to let people out. It's like, no, that's not what they're going to be working on. So really focusing on the facts and kind of like moving people and pivoting on issues and letting them know, like, they are going to decide about your health care. Do you know anybody that's ever had an abortion? A lot of people think they don't, but the reality is in our country, everybody has. And everybody knows somebody that has had one, whether it's a friend or a family member. D&Cs are very common with miscarriage. And people, if you say, do you know somebody that has a D&C? There's a lot of people that say yes. They don't understand that that's often an abortion. And then workers' rights, right? Like people don't understand. This is going to go to the Supreme Court, and it's going to affect your life. So
Yeah, those all seem really big. I mean, it just seems like when people hear the word court, they think of criminal court because of the like mass media representation of like, like the police procedural or whatever, that like, it's like, oh, right, courts deal with crime and criminality, but our courts deal with so much more than that. To the workers' rights piece, it does occur to me that there's also perhaps a connection between all of these like attacks on federal workers and the Doge thing, and then like it just seems like such a I don't know, it's like the current most aggressive manifestation of like the anti-union like trend in US politics that I feel like was also just so like I mean, I was a member of a graduate student union in like the early 2010s, so I very much remember Scott Walker's attacks on our union siblings in other state in Wisconsin. But yeah, I'm curious if people are connecting those dots too around like attacks on workers' rights and like what that conversation has been like around this race.
Yeah, I think people are connecting the dots. I think that it is difficult. Less people, again, you can't go with the same message that used to work, right? That this is just an attack against unions. A lot of people have never, ever been in a union. They don't even know what that means, right? They've never been part of a union in Wisconsin now. And so though we talk about workers' rights and we do talk about it being an attack on unions and workers, we have to make sure that we're reaching everybody and we're not just reaching a small pool of people. And everybody that, most people have worked or know somebody that's worked in a hostile work environment. They know what it's like not to be able to push back, whether it's on pay or on benefits. Maybe your benefits just get changed overnight on you and they go from good benefits to not good benefits, and you're also paying more for those. Like, people understand what that means. And so I think that's part of our job, is always helping talk about things in a way that connects with people and so that they can understand it.
Great. Are there less, I guess one of the last things I'm thinking about as we wrap up is like, first of all, what are ways that listeners can pitch into this fight, even if they're not in Wisconsin? I know that, there are some folks who are watching us live on Friday, and then this is going to hit people's podcast feeds on Monday. So time is tight, but I'm sure that the next 5 days are probably going to be the most intense.
Yeah, so we have phone banking on Monday night. And I think that we'll probably be adding a phone banking shift on Tuesday too. These are really important because it's that last minute that we're having the voter contact with folks. And a lot of people, even though the race is, just days away, there are a lot of people that still, they don't know that there's a Supreme Court race, or they don't know what the race is about. A lot of folks that we've talked to at the doors, they maybe know there's a race. They're like, yeah, I like to vote, but I don't even understand what the Supreme Court does. So,
right.
So these last minute conversations, we're still looking for people. So I'll make sure that you get that information, Caden,
Awesome.
where people can volunteer and help out with phone banking. And then we're still collecting funding. Actually, we're pushing all the way till the end with both our paid canvas and our volunteer canvas. And so, so those are two ways to help out. And also, if people are within driving distance, or if they want to, if they want to fly, but if they're within driving distance of Wisconsin, they can actually show up on election day and be plugged right into our volunteer program. We've got a great partnership this year with Seed the Vote. Seed the Vote is a PAC, and they usually work on only federal races. But last year, during the last election cycle for the presidential, WFP, we had our biggest year ever. We knocked over 300,000 doors. 60,000 of those were volunteer. And many of those were through our partnership with Seed the Vote. And so they have actually come to Wisconsin for the Supreme Court race. It's the first time they're trying it out for a non-federal race. And so we'd love to plug people into that so that you can participate and help us win, and also just kind of see what that partnership looks like.
Huge.
Yeah, I can't underscore enough how much money, even small amounts of money, make a huge difference for ads in the last few days and digital ads on TV, radio. People don't tune in until the very, very end. And one really fascinating finding from our research is it's the late deciders who actually are most open to a message of we can do safety, accountability, and justice, which I just found fascinating. It's like, it's the folks who are truly sort of independent, moderate. I don't know which way I'm going to vote. They are most sort of open to this, and in fact, most influenced by a message that sounds distinct and different from what they have heard before.
That makes actually a certain amount of sense to me also, that especially if you're doing this sort of civic education too, it's like, this is what this court does, that those people might be like, oh, you make a good point about what the role of this court could be. So anything else you want our listeners to know about this race? Anything else that's been on your mind that you're interested to get out to a movement audience?
If I can just pitch in, not necessarily about this race, but using this race as an example. I mean, we are sitting on a ton of good research and messaging, and we are working on mayoral races across the country this year. I'm in New York City. Crime is the dominant issue of debate. We're seeing it in lots of other places where there are mayoral races. The gubernatorial race in Virginia, this is going to be the wedge issue. If, history is any predictor of what will happen this year. And likewise for the 2026 election cycle, we've just seen this issue come up time and time again. So please reach out to us if folks are working on local races, on issue advocacy, and want some advice, guidance, research on the messaging and how to own safety and justice. We're here for it.
It's fantastic. We might have to have you back on, and we're planning an episode about New York City city elections, because like it's an interesting one.
Fascinating one. Yeah, would love to talk more about that.
Yeah, and I just like love to pitch, Working Families Party. We're a political party, and we want to be folks' political home. And so join the Working Families Party. And also we're always looking for donations. I mean, we weren't able to start our race and really doing door-to-door canvassing and direct voter contact until about February this year because of the amount of resources that we have. So having that funding early lets us talk to voters, and we are using methodology to get out the right message, working with the people that really know these things, and we're the ones that can give people the message in person rather than through the TV screen. So
yeah, great. Well, thank you so much, Corinne, Insha, for joining us today, telling us a little bit more about this race and how you all are fighting back in a really meaningful way against some like pretty spurious like far right fear mongering.
Thanks so much for having us. Thanks for having this conversation.
Yeah, this has been great.
Awesome. Well, so I realized recently that I consume a lot, and I mean a lot of media, and not just about the news, also fiction, media commentary, video games, you name it. And that stuff really informs the way that we program this show and the commentary that we provide. So I thought it'd be fun to start sharing some of the things that I'm reading or watching or listening to, so you can check it out as well. This week, I just want to share that last week, Natalie Wynn, who you might know as ContraPoints on YouTube, finally released a new video. It's a deep dive into conspiratorial thinking, not necessarily like the content of conspiracies themselves, although she talks about some of them as like case studies, but really the kind of thought process and the cultural impact of conspiracism in American society and politics. It's really well researched, it's funny, and I think you'll really appreciate it. If you haven't watched her 3-hour, basically doctoral thesis on the Twilight Saga, I recommend that too. It's a little lighter, very interesting. This stuff is free on YouTube, and in my opinion, this is what the internet should be for. So I hope you check it out and enjoy that video. My thanks again to Corinne Rosen from the Working Families Party of Wisconsin for joining me today. We'll drop links in the show notes on how you can get involved in the campaign in these final days and learn more about Vera's research. This show is published by Convergence, a magazine for radical insights. I'm Caden Mock. Our producer is Josh Elstro. Kimmy David designed our cover art and does our production assistance. If you have something to say, you can also always drop me a line. Send me an email that we'll consider running on an upcoming mailbag episode at mailbag@convergencemag.com. And finally, if you would like to support the work that we do at Convergence, bringing our movements together to strategize, struggle, and win in this crucial historical moment, you can become a member at convergencemag.com/donate. Even a few bucks a month goes a long way to making sure our independent small team can continue to build a map for our movements. I hope this helps.